I just can't do this video by myself. You know what? I do know who I can get. Sharpie, you're coming with me! So, Ctrl+Alt+Delete. The comic everyone knows for how bad it is. But is it that bad? Yes. But why is it that bad? That's the question we're going to be talking about today. Yes, because I got this fucking skunk to help me because they were the one to start this stupid-ass bit, and they bribed me to read this for a copy of Street Fighter 6 and Dark Souls 2. I wanted to play the Souls games in order, shut up.
The video part was more self-inflicted, but yes, we did read the first 10 years of CAD, because the plot of that is the only part anyone really cares about. The rest of it is just a bunch of gag comics, and if we had to read 10 more years of nonsense comics, I'd rather just play Running Wild again. There is a reboot comic after this, and a couple more plot-oriented comics after, but no, fuck that. I paid $15 for CAD 1.0, not fucking Analog and DickPad. I am way too tired of reading this comic to keep going with this shit.
Let's just get into the comic proper. We're not going to be doing a history section because, let's be real, you don't care. You just want to see the origin of this fucking image. All you need to know is this is just another gamer webcomic created in 2002, but this time there's a plot. But we're not here to do a meta-analysis about why gamer webcomics suck. We're here to talk about Ctrl+Alt+Delete.
Something interesting about a lot of the earliest CAD strips is that they seem to be attempting some kind of basic meta-commentary on gamer webcomics as a whole. This doesn't really go anywhere, but it's a little curious seeing the comic working to find its identity in real time. Before the comic puts focus on an overarching storyline, we get basic jokes about, wow, 2 gamers on a couch, or random acts of violence. Some of this looser style comes back in extra comics later, but we'll save that for when we get there. Our first 2 characters are Ethan and Lucas. They generally form the typical funny man, straight man dynamic that frequently shows up in comedy. Ethan is quick to action, quick to anger, and is shown to be incredibly passionate about his interests, often to the annoyance of others. Paladin has found themselves getting a lot of mileage comparing me to him, and I resent them for this. Of note, his displayed intelligence varies wildly over the course of the comic, though he's usually pretty average intelligence-wise. Usually.
Sharpie wrote in the script to write something about Lucas, but the problem is at the beginning of the comic, there's nothing really about both characters other than the dynamic. It's only really later that they turn into actual characters. Right now, they're just kind of author inserts. Even after he gets a personality, he's usually just a straight man for Ethan or is a prick. But we'll talk about that later.
Get ready for some classic early 2000s humor, including, but not limited to, dial-up internet being horrible, Radeon cards being bad for some reason, shitty running gags, and the first usage of a slur, which is a momentous occasion for any old mecha fan sub, but is just generally more typically used in internet media released during this period.
After some very hilarious jokes, we get the first semblance of a plot with Ethan somehow having a girlfriend. But oh boy, she wants to spend time with him, but he wants to play video games. How wacky. He gets dumped and develops alcoholism. That's pretty much the only amount of plot for the year. Okay, thanks, bye. Okay, fine, there's more, actually. And that's Ethan gets addicted to Asheron's Call 2, which is a thing that'll come back later a lot, don't you worry. More of the addiction to MMOs instead of, like, specifically that game. In December, we also get a new side character by the name of Scott. And his character trait is that he likes Linux, see? And he has a little pet penguin named Ted. Oh, how silly. I'm sure the comic will develop his character path to this one joke. And then we come to December 11th, 2002, and...
It started here. Huh.
Yup.
Judgment!
After some Christmas-related comics, including one where the punchline would probably work better if it was about stealing Battalion instead, we end the comic on Ethan getting beta for a copy of Star Wars Galaxies, just his computer gets fried, and he goes catatonic. So, what have we learned this year? Fucking nothing! Seriously, the first year of this comic is basically a generic early 2000s gamer webcomic, and nothing really happens besides a new roommate that brings a new type of joke that gets dropped later on, and, oh, Ethan has a girlfriend. Wait, no he doesn't. Let's just hope next year can bring something. Anything!
After Ethan snaps back to reality and then snaps back out again, a bunch of comics happen and we get the actual third main character, Lila. Right now, her personality is just girl who plays video games, and the jokes involving her are, wowee, gamers sure don't know how to talk to women, A bit later, and we get our first instance of what will come to be known as Winteremus. Winteremus is kind of dumb and not super important as a concept, but most of the comics around this time have story arcs in them. This first one does not, other than Ethan getting food poisoning from old cereal. After Ethan commits arson, his relationship with Lila begins in earnest, I guess. Maybe she likes arson? It's kind of jarring, to be honest. There isn't really any chemistry between the two of them whatsoever, and so their relationship just kind of feels bland for a lot of the comic. Anyways...
Scott actually pays for most of the rent, so Ethan and Lucas get jobs. Were they affording the apartment previously? Where Ethan gets a job at the game store and Lucas gets a job at a beer store. Both become regular spots for bad jokes about customers, with Lucas's jobs in particular being about how dumb and stupid customers definitely are, and Lucas's epic comebacks towards those customers that in reality are just kind of sad. Anyway, there's a mini arc where at the game store, the GameCube speaks inside Ethan's mind. His free will is an illusion, and he buys it, with Scott just kind of sensing it. After Tim Buckley, creator of Hit Ransom Ctrl+Alt+Delete, explains in a mini-novel why he doesn't like Linux through Scott's mouth. Just kidding, it's really bad Linux speak.
After this, we get the first instance of a real story arc in the comic, the Fallout 2 arc. Lucas hears about Fallout 2 getting a level editor and freaks out, rushing home immediately and destroying Ethan's computer. It turns out that when Fallout 2 first released, Ethan was sucked into it to the point of addiction. It was at such a level that even after intensive therapy, hearing the name alone could cause him to relapse. This then proceeds to happen when Ethan's boss mentions said level editor. Ethan immediately disappears without a trace. We eventually find Ethan is held up at what is described as a crack house for video game addicts, where he's willing to suck at Tekken to play Fallout as if that's a marketable skill. He then gets knocked out and forgets everything. Wait a minute. Nothing fucking happened! Okay, so something I thought I'd mention is that in our original draft, we went way more in depth. We've been skimming over a lot of the less important comics, but I found these amusing in a sense. Immediately after that story arc about Fallout ends, we have a straw man strip about people saying there aren't enough video games in the comic. The comic after that features a Vault Boy poster in the background, which raises several questions.
Alright, now we have the first real arc, which is that Lucas has an extra ticket to go to E3, but Ethan planned a date with Lila at the same time. So Ethan, after making a jab at Counter-Strike for some reason, finally decides to actually go on said date, with both Lucas and even Lila herself being shocked by this. On paper, this moment works, but in practice, since the relationship is basically non-existent, it feels a bit undercut, even if the moment is actually pretty good.
After an absolutely hilarious comic about Lucas dealing with a stupid customer, we're introduced to a new side character, though calling him a character might be a bit much. This is Rob. He likes Counter-Strike. Everybody hates Rob because he likes Counter-Strike. That is the extent of his character. He doesn't get any development, the jokes never change, it's just, fuck Counter-Strike. Anyway, we get a few comics about why Rob sucks, including one where Ethan imagines killing him. Seriously, Tim, did Turtle Rock mail you a paper bag full of shit or something? Before getting the epic conclusion to a series of comics about Star Wars Galaxies. We didn't really talk about them because they weren't super important, but the grand finale ends up being that Ethan doesn't like it and now he wants to off himself. Okay then. Anyway, here's a topical comic about the hit new video game Morrowind, and it's a pretty generic joke about the bug bus. You might ask, why was this included in the main storybook? Because Lucas is in it, through the webcomic staple of deep immersion gaming. Why were the books formatted like this? I have no clue. Now, what else was there? Let's see. There were a couple comics where they go to the beach. There's a drastic art style change that lasts for all of one strip. Doesn't look that good. Ethan sets fire up to the couch and they get chairs. That's certainly a way to be different in the webcomic space. Oh, here's something. So, Scott plays video games and ends up being better than Ethan. Ethan gets angry about that and learns meditation, which turns him evil for some reason. Scott kicks his ass again and Ethan is apparently still evil? This never gets brought up again.
For the real next arc, we have the game development arc. So Ethan plays a video game and thinks it sucks ass. So he then pulls a bender from Futurama Season 1 Episode 2 and makes his own video game. He gets Lucas to do programming, Scott to do the writing, Rob to do models, insert Counter-Strike joke here, and himself to be the designer and artist. Ethan sucks shit at managing, not even telling Rob what models to make, with the only thing that really actually produced being an esoteric game design document that's thousands of pages long. Ethan then wears a tight act professional, but he just ends up acting like a prick to everyone after ditching him. He attempts to make friends, fails, and then brings back the watermelon from the first page. And then Lucas eats that and eventually rips off the tie. Ethan then apologizes for being an insufferable prick. Did any of this amount to anything interesting or funny? No, even if it was intentional with Ethan being a prick, it just kind of evolves into another Ethan weird joke. Does this actually amount to anything relevant to the plot? Yes, actually. The fact that it happened. No, seriously, this comes back later. Keep this in your head for later, like, I don't know how many years later in the comic.
Final major story arc of the year, and it introduces us to a new main character. So Ethan wants to do some gaming with friends, but everyone is busy. So Ethan takes the only logical choice and makes a new friend. From scratch. Well, okay, not quite from scratch. He used the Xbox for materials. Yes, Ethan, from my personal favorite torture device, Ctrl+Alt+Delete, built a fucking robot out of an Xbox. The Xbox development literally just started, so his jokes pretty much all boil down to humans suck. Ethan then sticks an iPod up his mouth. Yes, the same Ethan who we just saw build a robot out of an Xbox. More characters start to interact with the Xbot, with Scott taking a liking to him because of Linux. There's a short mini-arc about Ethan getting knocked out and waking up in EverQuest, and a bunch of other random strips, before the year ends with Lila kissing Ethan.
Congratulations! Something finally fucking happened with the introduction of the two main characters and 2 new locations for jokes. But still, most of it was just dumb fluff with the characters we got. Well, one was just born, and the other is still fairly generic gamer girl character, and just kind of enters a relationship with the main guy for no reason. Sure. Main problem with this year was the pacing, because my god, it was bad. It was either way too fast or just painfully slow. Like, the arcs are so few and far between, but how they just go kind of resolves themselves too fast, and it's just bleh. So hopefully next year we'll straighten this stuff out. After some Voldo time, seriously, this man built a robot, we got the second Winterine Miss, where its presence is going to be take over the month of January for the rest of the comic. Anyway, it's about Ethan wanting to actually spread Winterine Miss, which, right, forgot to explain what it actually is. It's Gamer Christmas. That's it. Also, it lasts for a week because fucking Hanukkah has a week or something and the season was all a month. Sure. Ethan tries to spread it and Scott and Lucas are just trying to be nice. He even tries singing Winterine Miss carols. No, fuck you, a cheat code isn't a carol. I want to dropkick this man. Turns out him being an idiot gets people that actually have an holiday, and me and Lucas are pissed about this. God, I hate this shit.
Back to... not that. And there's a couple of strips where Ethan acts like he's in 24. Paladin's only experience with that show is with all of the parodies, so this kind of gets a whole lot of nothing. That's kind of a prevailing problem with gamer webcomics. They tend to be very topical. Obviously there's talk about new games, but there's also talk about the general pop culture of the time. This ends up heavily dating the comedy, so jokes won't land as well when your readers happen to be a couple of older Zoomers who don't really have experience with the subject being referenced. After that are some Valentine's Day comics where Ethan gets Lila a chocolate statue of himself. Not very self-centered of him at all, great job. 2 strips later and Lucas gets fired because he's an asshole, and right before getting fired calls a customer the R-slur, which, yeah, fuck him for that. So now we get to the next arc of the comic where Ethan learns Fallout 3 just got cancelled. Or, well, I guess this feeds into what I was talking about earlier. See, obviously we have Fallout 3 now, but this was the original Fallout 3, codenamed Van Buren. It got cancelled around the end of 2003 since Interplay was going through some financial troubles. Fun little fact, it would have run on the same engine as Baldur's Gate 3, a game that also got cancelled before a completely different game by the same name came out years later. Alright, back to the plot. Ethan gets pissed and unsuccessfully tries to rally people to protest outside of the Interplay offices. When that doesn't work, he mails himself to the CEO and gets arrested. None of this was really that funny. The next thing that happens is that Lucas gets another job at another computer place where the owner is also an asshole, so nothing about the jokes really changes here.
Then there's the next major arc in the comic, and there's actually some decent character development. This time for the X-Bot, who wants to become more human and actually get a name. Which started because he wanted to eat some French toast, which, to be fair, I get it. He wears some of Ethan's clothes and heads outside, helping an old lady cross the road before abandoning her halfway through. One strip later, he comes back and immediately hates humanity because he got busted up by people. He gets repaired and gets a new name for the name that got spray painted onto his back, Ezekiel, or just Zeke for short. Which, hey, now we can talk about our favorite character in the comic now that he's been established. One thing that helps Zeke is that he's actually more of a wild card character in comparison to the rest of the cast, which is pretty much just mostly made of straight men characters to Ethan's funny man antics. He'd either be a straight man to Ethan or Jonah with his schemes. Is this us grasping at straws because most of the characters are basically the same type of character? Maybe, but it does help that Zeke actually gets a lot of character development through a lot of future plots. Mostly a lot of self-searching, finding out who he really is.
The next arc is about Lila's old love life, as her ex, Christian, comes back to town. He's a rich asshole who doesn't care about her. This is signified by how he gives her a copy of Daikatana. Even as someone who actually likes that game, no, don't. Ethan then shows up, gets jealous of how rich he is, and thinks that she might get back with Christian. A while later, he comes back to tell her why she should be with him, before Christian shows up again and acts like a dick. Ethan punches him in the face, and the arc ends with Lila coming to Ethan while he works at Gamehaven to apologize and kiss. Christian doesn't sue because it would be too much trouble, and Lila plays the Guild Wars trial for Ethan because of his broken hand. This arc is actually kind of interesting, mostly because it actually works to build Ethan and Lila's relationship and put it back on track. But at the same time, there was barely anything to suggest that the relationship was strained to begin with. It feels like it comes out of nowhere except for like one comic before this happens. Overall, it's just kind of boring if you're not into the romantic aspect of stories. There's a couple extra gag stories, the first of which has Ethan putting Ted on a mock trial for ruining his computer, only for everyone else to find out that Ethan set him up. The other gag arc is about Ethan getting his wisdom teeth removed, with another gag stating that he Homer Simpsoned himself with a PS1 memory card somehow? This man built a robot. How do you fit that in there? There's actually a book exclusive arc about how Ethan and Lucas met, but it doesn't really do much other than add to Ethan's long-running track record of arson. There's also this strange crossover comic where an Apple-themed Transformer from the webcomic Apple Geeks shows up and gets told,
"You should kill yourself now!"
before he does exactly that. Sure? Okay then.
I would say that this is where we started to notice the comics art style changing into one it's known for. The copy-paste workflow, the constant use of the BU face, the same background, the same posing, you name it, it was copy-pasted. There's even a time-lapse of him working on a Christmas image, and it's pretty much just a constant use of stock assets. The use of reusable assets isn't a bad thing. I mean, come on, I would sound like a hypocrite if I were to say that. But the problem was that Tim Buckley's workflow ended up stagnating the comics art style for years, and the comic itself ended up feeling stiff, like you were reading Garfield or something. Honestly, the art style was worse in the beginning. Seriously, Lucas's jaw was terribly proportioned until 2004. Characters were not shaded at all, only started to get shaded in the 6th comic, thankfully. And for the first year, the only real change in it was a thicker outline. It was very amateurish at the start, and I would say at the beginning of 2004 was when the adjustments were starting to be made to the art style. It was actually interesting to see how gradual the changes were. I'd say around March was when it was prominent, but in July, with this Fridge comic, was when the final details were made, and the comic's infamous art style will be finalized for many years. Hey, Paladin from the future again with a quick correction. There's actually more proportional edits and thicker outlines in 2005, which is really when the art style was cemented for years. A lot was established this year, but it was a lot more refined next year. That's basically it, as far as I'm aware. We'll talk about the later art style when it comes up, which will basically be in part 2. back to the story, and we get another romance arc involving Lucas. It starts with him frying his memory, so he goes to the store to get more, and then he gets ran over by a girl, and then they start dating. Then, oops, she's actually psycho, and he gets a restraining order. Yeah, Lucas's love life is going to be a plot point, and spoiler warning, it gets kind of dumb. One interesting note is how in the author commentary, Buckley points out the car that runs Lucas over is a Mazda MX-3, which he drove at the time. Which is just proving a friend's point about how the Mazda drivers are insane. We then come to the Mac Panthers arc. Yeah. So Ethan gets rained on and goes into a building, only to realize it's an Apple store. He then tries to leave, but then gets hit with a Power Mac G5 and then gets amnesia. The guy helping him goes and explained it, "You're in the headquarters of the Mac Panthers." And yes, that's the fucking logo they were using. We're not done yet. Ethan then joins the Mac Panthers using the name Malcolm Leroy Johnson, or Malcolm OSX. We swear we're not making this up. This is real. Ethan then starts protesting in front of a national Monopoly tournament where Bill Gates is defending his title, and Ethan is demanding equal rights for Max. And if this isn't met, he's going to detonate explosives he has planted around the hotel. We swear to God. Lucas then shows up before realizing that he has amnesia because he hates Xbox. He hits Ethan with another Power Mac G5, but doesn't work. What does work is showing Ethan a picture of him being married to Windows XP. This causes Ethan to Eminem, and he proceeds to accidentally activate the detonator anyway. No one is harmed somehow. This was the best part of the comic because it's just so fucking absurd that loops around to being the funniest fucking thing. Just a perfect encapsulation of mid-2000s computer opinions. Just the fucking name Malcolm OXX, just what?
So, moving on, and we get the next arc of the comic, where Ethan wants to play all of the videos game, but they're coming out too fast. The solution? He tries to build a time-freezing machine. Sure. Anyway, he presses the button, with the time core being powered by butter and paper clips. Somehow, it actually seems to work. In reality, it's actually just Lucas and Scott fucking with him. Ethan tries to unfreeze time, and Lucas and Scott then make Ethan believe he's in a dystopian future. Ethan gets ready to fucking churn butter before realizing that he's actually just being punked. The arc ends with Ethan from the future showing up, before the present Ethan punches him in the face because he's not falling for this shit again. Actually, a pretty decent story. It was well-paced, and the jokes actually kind of landed. And after a bunch of Christmas comics, we get another famous panel.
Woo! 2005, Year of the Gamer!
Woo! And thus ends 2004, where honestly, there's some interesting things about it. Well, it was mostly in the back half of the year with the Mac Panthers and the time prank thing, but there was also the art style change that would basically become the main style for years. Also, Ethan and Lila becoming a couple for real this time, which, it's definitely the best year so far. That's not saying much when the pull of quality is buried under the ground. I can't believe that hit Sisyphus simulator Ctrl+Alt+Delete predicted Among Us 15 years before it happened with its Winterine Miss arc. Yes, for this Winterine Miss arc, there's an imposter proclaiming that they're the king of Winterine Miss. And Ethan is so pissed, he's basically that type of angry warrior incomprehensible. Ethan goes to this person's location, vents into the area he's in, and calls him an imposter. They battle or something, and Ethan beats the shit out of him with this one panel strip. The true story comes out, and then the evil mastermind does his best Dr. Claw impression. It's interesting to see experimentations in the style, but, that's not really much when most of the comics art style is very rigid, and it's really only being shown at this one camera angle. So it feels more like an outlier, if anything.
So, after another Linux bad joke strip, there's the Valentine's Day comic where Lila drops hints about it, Ethan seemingly doesn't care, and then Lila bursts into Ethan's room to find a slightly stretched D-pad made out of roses. Neat. Meanwhile, Zeke plays the GameCube, and it turns out he's fallen in love with it. Zeke wants Ethan to make the GameCube into another robot, and Ethan just goes, "No, here's Brothers in Arms." And that just ends that for a bit. Next thing we have is Ethan wants a new TV, Lucas goes, and then Ethan commits an act of grievous property damage. They go to Best Buy and Ethan wants to get an 80-inch plasma TV, Man, remember when plasma was the hot shit? So he applies for a credit card, which he immediately maxes out. Meanwhile, Lucas meets another girl by the name of Emma, who works there and is like Lucas, but a girl. Ethan is forced to return the things he purchased, and that causes Emma to get fired because Ethan is an asshole. Lucas keeps the TV though. Lucas then invites Emma to her house, and Ethan has to hide Zeke and... Okay, yeah, we're going to have to talk about the dialogue. One of the more infamous aspects of this comic is that there is so much dialogue. Like, it is a 4-panel strip, and yet the dialogue is so stupidly dense that it can practically take up most of the page. Hell, sometimes even more dialogue is added when the lack of dialogue would have made the joke land better. It's kind of like how really early anime dubs would insert extra dialogue to fill up dead air, which can end up ruining scenes, and that very much applies to this comic. Anyway, Ethan and Emma meet up again and yell at each other, with Lucas trying to mediate things by pointing out that Ethan also works in retail, and yeah, this next part is just kinda childish, with Emma trying to get Ethan fired from his job. This kind of just ends with Ethan and Emma just continuing to be snippy at each other while Emma and Lucas start to date. Another criticism that starts to apply here is that there's long stretches of time where the comic isn't really about video games at all. There's just a lot of arcs about relationships and other life stuff, and it's kind of just meh. Not really a big deal, main focus is still around video games, but it's a sign of Tim wanting to do more than just gamer jokes, which, honestly, you know what, yeah, I can kind of respect that. Like, sure, it absolutely falls flat on its face trying to do this, but that's kind of what makes it interesting to talk about compared to other gaming webcomics. Alright, back to the main story, we've got some mini-arcs. One of them has Lucas getting kidnapped by a Song of Ice and Fire nerds. This goes nowhere and he just shows back up without any mention of this ever happening.
Cool!
There's another mini-arc of Emma taking Lucas to do more non-gaming things, like skydiving and rock climbing. In all of these, Lucas tends to get injured. A couple comics later, and we actually get a book-exclusive arc, where Zeke is unable to play Deus Ex Invisible War due to disk read errors. This stems from how Zeke was a first-generation Xbox, and then he gets his disk drive upgraded. Sticking to some sense of continuity is nice.
Zeke actually does play a role in the next arc, which is a major one, not only for having some changes to the comic, but also for being more dramatic instead of just being comedic. So it's hot as balls right now, and Ethan and Lila play with water balloons inside, and Zeke gets hit with one and malfunctions. Lila wonders how the fuck there's a sentient Xbox in the house, and Ethan goes, "Girl, I told you multiple times." Which, in fairness, he did. Zeke is seemingly dead until his body slumps over and hits a battery next to him, powering him back on with murderous intent. The apartment gets destroyed with Lucas just showing up and wondering what's going on, and tries stopping Zeke, only for Zeke to break his leg. Zeke picks up the GameCube and tosses the TV, causing it to explode, which, I don't think plasma TVs can do that. Zeke tries to choke out Lila, only for Ethan to save her and knock Zeke out of his murderous state. The apartment collapses and Zeke is caught in the rubble, where Ethan, in order to save Zeke, rips off his head to preserve his hard drive of only 8 gigabytes. Ethan gets out of the apartment as the rest of it burns down. This starts another arc where the group tries to find a new home. This is actually interesting because it was really the first time the comic tried to be actually dramatic. That being said, there's still problems. Mainly that the writing style for the comic really feels like Tim tries to shove punchlines in when not needed, which just kinda deflates the dramatic tone of the comic is attempting. Another problem is that with the style of the comic, both layout and art just holds it back. The 4-panel layout leads to previously mentioned inserting of unnecessary punchlines, and the art style doesn't really carry the motions that are happening with posing that just feel really stilted. So back to the story, and everyone's looking for a place to live, with the new thing of Lila actually living with them, because at this point, even if I told you, you probably would have forgotten that she was just a neighbor. There's a bit where Ethan goes crazy with not playing video games, and there's also another joke where Scott just keeps disappearing and appearing, because it's pretty much the new joke for Scott at this point, since Tim doesn't really have any new Linux jokes to make up anymore. They finally move into the new home where everyone lives until the end of the story. After everyone settles in, Ethan proceeds to rebuild Zeke without anyone knowing. Meanwhile, Lila meets Emma and does not pass the vibe check, which turns out to be true because Emma has ulterior motives to her relationship. Ethan finishes Zeke up with an additional limb remote lock just in case. He reintroduces Zeke to everyone else, who are understandably pissed. But that gets quickly swept up as there's Halloween comics. There's some more stuff about Lucas and Emma, and also Zeke being paranoid because of the 360 being announced. And then we get our next arc. Emma's trying to kill Lucas because, yep, she's actually evil this whole time, even though, why? She was trying to steal Lucas's uncle's money, but he doesn't even have an uncle. Still, she just calls up her real boyfriend and they just plan on robbing and killing them anyway. Also, Ethan gets tied up too. They plan on selling the 360 that Ethan bought when Zeke shows up, and while the thieves are distracted with holy shit, a robot, Ethan goes, hey, they're making me play the 360, which causes Zeke to attack them. He gets his hand shot off and Zeke knocks him out. The cops are called and they get arrested. In the aftermath of the arc, Zeke gets upgraded into a 360. Honestly, it would have been funny if we see this version of the comic continued and Zeke got upgraded to an X-Bone, and maybe eventually an X-Sex, I don't know. Anyway, some Christmas stuff later, and that's the end of 2005. Overall, this year was both more of the same and improvement in some cases. Mainly with actually trying to experiment with storytelling in that one Winter Emus panel, but that's it, really. Emma's last arc was the start of a thing where Tim doesn't really like something, so he kind of just bullshits a reason to write them out, even if there's no real indication of it until, like, a little bit before the last moment. Overall, it's just more of the same. Meh.
This year opens with the annual Winter Emus story. The same nefarious group planning to commercialize the holiday strikes with a new plan and fucking kidnaps Lila. Insane escalation in this comic sometimes, I swear to God. Ethan gives up the crown to save his girlfriend, and the company's attempt to commercialize Winter Emus instantly fails, as they went out of business thanks to an organized boycott by every single gamer. Sure, this feels like Buckley set something up, decided to back out of it, and then just kind of came up with a bullshit excuse for it to stop. Like, remember that time Ethan was evil for a bit? It's like that. We then get a few comics about Ethan being broke, before the reveal that he's spent all of his money on a single arcade game in order to fill out the high score table. Put together, the initials form Ethan's proposal to Lila. That's actually kinda cute. The next gag arc has Ethan wanting to play Oblivion early, so he sneaks into the Bethesda offices to try and steal it. After a couple of failed attempts, including venting and getting caught because he heard Fallout 3, he gets kicked out with no copy of Oblivion. Overall, nothing to note here. Next gag arc. Barry has the ability to go to E3 and chooses to take Rob with him, causing Ethan to try and cripple and kill Rob so that he can go to E3 instead. He does hurt Rob, but he doesn't go. What's this note here? S? When saying this? No, I'm not doing this. It's a non sequitur and not a funny one. I'm just gonna say it. Sometimes your writing falls flat. He does end up hurting Rob, but he still doesn't get to go. Give this man a fucking Pulitzer. Our next real arc has Ethan meeting Lila's parents. There's a lot of stress, but the ultimate point is that they're okay with Ethan being weird. The end.
After another arc about Ethan being Superman, there's just an entire arc about everyone getting hurt. So, Scott and Ted are being suspicious and installing a satellite on the roof. Zeke joined because of satellite TV, and they push him off the roof. Everyone hears the crash, including Lucas, who cuts himself badly. Ethan and Lila see Zeke being badly damaged and go get Lucas, and then Ethan faints, seeing all the blood. Everyone's in the hospital, and there's another thing about Lucas' love life, where he gets a number from a nurse, but he just goes, yeah, no, because the two we already saw in the comic. Anyway, Zeke gets repaired and doesn't remember anything. Yeah, not a big fan of this one. Just kind of unnecessarily brutal, to be honest, with the only thing that being the love life, which I don't really care about. Next arc. Okay, so the next arc is about Ethan making his own bootleg E3. Wait, why do we have this in the script?
Because it's really funny in hindsight.
Right, because E3 is actually dead now. For the next arc we have... So Lila and her gaming partner Jacob, that definitely existed, get invited to a video game tournament, and Ethan can't go. Ethan apologizes and gets to go, but he's not allowed to become Gordon Freeman with his comically small crowbar. Most of the arc is just Ethan dicking around while Lila deals with his bullshit, and it turns out that Lila being mad at Ethan makes her play better for some reason, and she ends up getting third in her first tournament, which is impressive. This is literally the first time this stuff about Lila have a competitive edge, but hey, at least she has something other than more than Gamer Girl. This next arc is summarized with Ethan learns about 40k, but is too lazy to learn how to play it. Next slide. The final arc for this year is that Lila quits her job that we've never seen so that she can become a full-time professional gamer. Ethan is upset because she could be home all day gaming and he can't. Ethan does a bit, and Lila walks in and they fight. While Ethan sleeps in Game Haven, Lila does some violent video game-based therapy with Zeke. They both back up for the end of 2006, thank God. Yeah, real quick this year. Interesting part is how Lila is more than girl gamer. Now she's professional girl gamer. Yeah, over time you can tell Buckley does not really give a shit about the characters past Ethan and Lucas, and everything just kind of revolves around them. Like how it took until now for Lila to get some actual development, and Scott is relegated to basically not existing. Let's hope this next year has something going on. Fuck it, let's just get this out of the way. This winter dream is about Ethan making the ultimate gamer chair with AC, USB, a fridge, adult diapers, sleep fail-safe, and bulletproof glass. This fucker flips between being an idiot and building a robot. You can't just have both, it just doesn't work. Because I don't believe that this is the same guy. He seals himself inside and the box won't open. Lila gets mad and goes into the real world to own some new blitz. Ugh. Ethan starts going insane and he shuts down or something, and the spirit of retro gaming sends him to the pitfall. Anyway, after some so retro moments later, it just kind of ends and he's free. The end, fucking so boring. After this, there's a little arc about how Scott met Ted. He was protesting a laboratory doing animal experiments, and he was just able to sneak in, and there was Ted. The end. Next long-term story is of Ethan and Lila planning their wedding, which will be resolved in a couple years. Then we get to the next romance arc, with Lucas trying this again with online dating, and Zeke does a little trolling and gets him set up with Kate, who was initially fat, and Lucas doesn't like that. And then we get to our house, it's like, yeah, I was wearing a suit that makes me look fat. And come on, Tim, just let her be fat, you fucking coward. We stan our big, beautiful women. Like, seriously, the women in this comic just had the same body type, and it's kind of ridiculous. And this could have been the only time where it could have been different, but then, lol, fat suit, fuck you. They start dating, and spoiler alert for the second half of the comic, but they don't stop dating? Kind of? You see, around 2009, she just kind of disappears. Like, she's just kind of gone for 3 years of the comic. And at the end, Lucas meets another girl in the ending, and has kids with her instead, and it's just, like, kind of weird, because, like, Tim just seemingly forgot about her. This comic is just a large problem with writing women characters. I wonder why that is. Back to the comic, and after a 300 comic we get, I am going to eat my fucking cereal. Cereal strike. That really pissed me off. It's the cereal strike, it's really cool. Cereal strike is bullshit. I hate it. Anyway, they're on their first date now, and Lucas is wearing a bulletproof vest and lies saying he's undercover. After talking it out and telling the truth, they promise to do more dating and try again. The comic after that is the most mid-2000s nerd shit imaginable. The phrase, "my brain wouldn't have been able to withstand this geek character orgy of sheer awesomeness," makes this truly a comic of all time. Next gag arc is of Ethan making a power glove and able to take off with the power, and he rips his own dick off. Truly an arc. Next arc is Kate meeting Ethan, and she's used to this type of thing. Nothing really happens again.
For the next real arc, Ethan starts a religion about gaming. There's no reason for this to be happening other than what can be described as going a bit too far.
Gee, I wonder how that feels!
Ethan starts writing the holy
enclosed instruction book
for the sacred church of gaming. Suddenly, the three major religions of the world somehow get wind of this. Ethan spreads the church through the internet, and there's a joke about the N-Gage in 2007. Meanwhile, there's just generally some bickering about what to do with Ethan. Ethan does a sermon, the religions show up and go, "Fuck you!" Ethan and Lucas destroy them with facts and logic, and they end up giving up. This was dumb, but the church still shows up every now and then after this. After that, there's an arc where Ethan's shenanigans end up sending Kate to the hospital before Lucas realizes he might not actually love her. Ted kills the shenanigans, and Lucas decides not to tell her because maybe he'll feel something again. Immediately, we are given a strip about Rob being harassed about Counter-Strike. Are you noticing the mood whiplash? We get an arc about someone not knowing if they actually love someone else, and immediately we just go right back into a joke strip. There doesn't really feel like there's a good balance of character writing and humor here. Some of this might be because we're skipping over a lot of the extra joke comics that are placed in between these. It would probably be even worse if we did include them, but if we did that, the pacing of this video would be complete trash. You can absolutely strike a good balance between this stuff. Heck, that's why Paladin and I like a lot of comedies, but Tim doesn't do it very well, so it just feels like whiplash more than anything. Speaking of the famous video game Whiplash for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, what? Huh? This is fucking garbage. Ethan sneaks into BioWare to try another heist. This time he's trying to get Mass Effect early, and poses as Lucas to try and get a job there. He gets a copy, plays it all night in the office, and sneaks out without getting caught. When he comes back to America, he learns he can't play it because Zeke is a retail Xbox and not a dev kit, something I'm surprised Tim actually took into consideration. The arc ends with no Mass Effect. We get another update on Kate and Lucas, where Lucas just tells Kate about what his feelings are after they have sex, and she just goes, "Oh, okay, sure, we'll still be dating." And then that's it? After Blender Explode, we get some backstory about Ethan, and how he loved EverQuest during his senior year. Ethan ended up getting heavily addicted to it, to the point of forsaking all other aspects of his— wait, didn't we just do this already with Fallout 2? Anyways, instead of hypnotherapy, Ethan is just weaned off of EverQuest for an entire year, and something like this ends up happening with pretty much any MMO he ever touches. Ethan really wants to play EverQuest 2, arguing that if he can't play it, then his friends shouldn't be able to play it either. So everyone else decides that Ethan can only play with them, with a lot of countermeasures put into place just so that he can't make a stupid amount of progress without them. Ethan then falls back into addiction, and they try several things to break him out, with Lila's method actually working. Which, yeah, it's just—
Boobs! I mean, Naruto!
This year amplified a lot of the problems with the comic. Mainly the tonal whiplash and how outlandish shit is getting. Like, sure, whatever, Ethan builds a robot, but him making a fucking gamer religion is just like, fucking what? And there's the major religion showing up to go,
Fuck you!
about it, and that's, like, why should I care? And if you think, oh, well, it can't be that big. Nah, a comic in 2008 basically shows a lot of people leaving, so yeah, he made a fucking religion. This man works in a video game store, what the hell? The only real interesting thing that I could say actually happened was with Lucas and Kate's relationship, where Lucas doesn't even know if he loves her. But then that plot point is just kind of resolved anyway, and she disappears anyway in 2 years, so none of this matters. His year was just meh. So, that was the end of the first half of CAD 1.0. It just sucked. It was just a bad gaming webcomic.
like, the problem with the comic is that it's just aggressively okay. It does the grave sin of entertainment in that it's just boring. Yeah, there's some stuff from the beginning that caught us off guard, but the more we read, the more we were just tired and we just wanted to get this over with.
Hell, the interesting stuff we wanted to talk about isn't even until the second half because of something that changed the entire comic for the rest of its lifetime. Like, if it weren't for that one comic, no one would remember this thing beyond people who are obsessed with bad comics.
Paladin, you don't need to hide it. We all know what you're talking about. Everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's for suspense. But you're right. Everyone already knows about... hold on. Hello, Paladin, where videos are... Oh, hey. What? Oh my. Okay. Which hospital? Okay, I'm on my way. So, you should press that subscribe button and that like button. That'd be pretty epic.
Wait, what the fuck?